All right, well, here we go with Sherwin Anderson's Sophistication. The usual disclaimers apply. A lot of approaches to this story that just aren't going to get discussed at all due to what our focus is here and just time issues. The Helen White character is going to not really be discussed very much. A lot of interesting possibilities there that just, again, we don't have time for. So without further ado, here we go. So some key concepts and distinctions, we've seen some of these before, and they kind of clump, amusement versus meaning, ambition versus enthusiasm, success versus thriving, amour propre and amour de soi. Those are all have a lot of overlap about a kind of lack of sophistication that acts as a ceiling for what one can try to achieve with one's life. And if you don't have sophistication, I think one of Anderson's main points is you can't get at the full rich meaning of that human life makes possible. And so these tendencies to shoot too low because you're not wise and haven't manifested that wisdom in a sophisticated way is a central part of the story, and certainly most of our 10th graders are not necessarily very sophisticated yet. The competence, relatedness, autonomy is back, I think very important to the story, and then different aspects of the self, inwardness especially probably in this story, very important, and then negative capability, which is that odd virtue that John Keats names about being able to keep competing ideas that don't get along very well in your head, or keeping just competing aspects of selfhood that don't get along very well on the tracks together. You're maintaining a kind of coherence without truncating any of the competing aspects of selfhood or voices or however you want to think of those. I think that's pretty important here too. So I think the tone gets set early and as a repeating theme. It's not a coincidence that it's dusk and it's autumn and there's dust in the air and dead leaves and the sun is departing and George is departing his adolescence, and so the tone is set nicely early on about this is the end of something and the beginning of some other era of life, and again our boys are close to that place, and we're going to try to fast forward them to that place even more. Diction in this passage, I think, is really good, and it's again effective at making important distinctions. Right, that this town is working terribly at the task of amusing itself. So it's working for amusement. It's working terribly, and again, there's this sense that George is becoming cognizant of, right, that you can waste your life. And again, there's nothing evil about amusement or anything, but it's like you can have a life spent trying to amuse yourself. And certainly our 10th grade boys, if we take away our efforts to get them to come to master practices and come to understand and delight in the internal goods of building and caring, if we take away the structures that do that for them, most of them would sink pretty quickly back into a video game life and wanting to play golf or just go on vacation. And so you get this tension between kinds of achievement, right? And what's the goal what's the highest goal a human life can have? And George is on the outs with the town on this one. This passage is central to the story, I think, and again, it's getting at the distinction between boyhood and manhood, in a way that's quite effective, right? And as we've discussed in the past, we try to get through the boys, that boys are primarily cared for and men primarily care. So here George is on the cusp of manhood, and he's feeling like this new sense of awe and terror at his need to transition to somebody who's going to take care of himself. His mother's dead, and he doesn't have anybody to care for him, and he's lonely. He's been cared for most of his life, and he's about to leave the womb of this town behind, and that sense of awe at manhood, both the adventure of it, but again, we're going to try to stress the competence, relatedness, and autonomy of it. And is George ready? And what will he do exactly? And what's his life going to be about? That he hasn't had to ask these questions yet, and he's asking them now. And we're trying to get the boys to ask these questions again a year or two ahead of when they might otherwise do so. That passage continues and just gets better and better, I think. There's a time in the life of every boy when he, for the first time, takes the backward view of life. Perhaps that is the moment when he crosses the line into manhood. And again, just what a great way to define, manhood for the boys as a change in understanding, as a change in one's attitude toward one's whole life, rather than, have you had sex or not, or have you had alcohol or gotten stoned yet, or whatever would be, the popular culture's way of defining that. And then that great phrase, like taking the backward view, I think it's incredibly powerful, and especially as setting up for the family history paper, even more so. So what does that mean, taking the backward view? I think it means that George, in this moment of leaving being taken care of behind and moving out toward an undetermined manhood where he's going to have to take care of himself and other people, he's really in this sort of, again, autumn and dusk and end of this period of his life. He's got this strong sense of mortality, and I think he's leapfrogging ahead to look back at his whole life from like his place of death. And it's wonderful because then it's like this question, like what will be there? Like what will be the content of that life? And then what will be the meaning of that life? And so you get, for the first time, if this is the first time this ever happened to him, he gets for the first time this question of what will make the meaning of my life and the substance of my life, in a way that, again, a lot of our boys haven't asked yet. And so we're trying to get them to that place by having them read this story and consider it in this way. And again, some of the first things that flare up are ambitions, and that's normal, right? It's normal for a person in our culture to, and a human being, to have ambitions. So his first instinct is like competitive, right? Like how am I gonna beat other people in that space? But then it becomes, again, pseudo-religious, right? He's sort of waiting for a calling. He's waiting for the world to tell him what to do. So it's a wonderful moment where he really has his antenna up for finding out, what his life's supposed to be about. Passage goes on. It's the gift that keeps on giving. It just kind of gets better and better as he is losing confidence in his ability to deal with the future, because he's leaving behind a boyish sense of manly life that he was imagining, and he's realizing that's not going to cut it, though he doesn't know why. And then there's that wonderful passage, right, that he's thinking of all the people who came out of nothing, lived their lives, and then faded back into nothing. And so that's obviously a potentially very nihilistic space that he's in. And you might say, oh, what's the use? And go back to your amusement, right? but he's going to take it in a different direction, right? It's like there's meaninglessness behind us, there's meaninglessness ahead of us, and then there's this life. And what an incredible opportunity for meaning if you know what you're about. Well, how do you live that life so that it matters? Granted, you're coming from nothing and you're going to go back to nothing. And so rather than saying, oh, I'm not going to go back to nothing, I'm going to live forever in heaven or something, which is not in here, he's the focus is going to be on this world. So a couple early questions to help us think this through. What is sophistication? Obviously a question that will be present throughout the story. And what does it mean, and how does this story add to our sense of what that is? And it seems clearly linked with wisdom and a kind of application of the wisdom to your life to make you more capable of living well. A sophisticated person is a wise person who knows how to apply that wisdom, because you could certainly see how you could misapply the wisdom of that he realizes about coming from nothing and living a brief life and going back to nothing, right? You could say, the horror, right? But that's not sophisticated, right? That's just insightful maybe, but it's taking it in a way that's not particularly helpful to thriving. And so why is sophistication sad? And this is wonderful, right? It's again, a contrast to amusement, that if you take the goals of childhood, they are not the goals of adulthood. And so sophistication will be sad for a boy, right? Because it's the end of that naivete. It's the end of the idea that life is about amusement. And it's the end of a kind of naive, uncritical, just throwing yourself into the exuberance of play, where everybody's supporting you and you're not even aware of it. And now you're getting to this different space where the meaning is going to be, amusement is not going to be really what it's about. It's going to have a different kind of meaning. Ultimately a preferable kind of meaning, but in this moment of transition, I think it's going to come off as sad. The passage just keeps rolling, and the potentially nihilistic aspects of it get accentuated again, and he's going to die. He's facing his mortality squarely. He's facing the ambiguity of how to live in the face of it squarely, and again, he's in this sort of existential moment where often existentialists lose it and then end up just reveling in the kind of individual despair at this phenomenon. Unfortunately, because I think Anderson takes it in exactly the right direction, right, which is the same direction Whitman takes it, that Emerson takes it, that the Americans take it at their best, right? Which is back toward the world and relatedness, right? He wants somebody to understand this situation. He wants somebody to be with during this, because there's nothing for an individual to do in this moment, right? Individual separated from his world has nothing to do. It's utterly terrifying condition. Fortunately, we're not isolated, and there are these other people, if you learn how to relate to, well, wow, this gets really, really, really meaningful really fast if you know what you're doing. And so the turn toward understanding, to me, is a turn toward relatedness and the desire to try to form his first adult, mature relationship. For whatever it's worth, I don't know if this will help or not, but the third step out of 5 in the transition toward Buddhist wisdom is to become aware that we're all enmeshed in a web of mortal things, and that's a potentially crushing thing for the ego to deal with, because again, the ego's tendency is just to take everything, to spread itself out throughout the whole universe, and to make it believe that the whole universe exists for the ego, and to put limitations on the ego, that it comes out of the world and it's going to be there a while and then it's going to pass away like everything else. It's brutal in the moment. It's very difficult for it to deal with, but it opens for the Buddhist an entirely new vista for care, because now the ego doesn't have to make an enemy of everything that's trying to limit it, and it can just address its energies toward caring for the world, because it now no longer has this mistaken special privileged place in the universe. It's just in there with everything else. And it's in many ways liberating, and it's when you get on the happy side of it, it's a very joyous condition. And again, this would be one way of understanding what George is going through. And so all these issues about immaturity and maturity, ambition versus enthusiasm, and success versus thriving, are raised in this passage. And this is sort of before his night of epiphany here, back when he's still a boy. So he has these false understandings of what manhood can be about. He walks with Helen White and says, I'm gonna be a big man in this town. And he's bragging, right? He's still dominated by ego. He's still actually dominated by, the lizard brain and liminal brain, and his cortex isn't there yet, which, we're not really developing that whole reading. But anyway, that's largely what's going on. This impulse to boast, this impulse to compete, this impulse to understand one's life as beating other people for acclaim and recognition, rather than the internal goods of actually creating and caring. And so, again, skillfully done by Sherwood Anderson, I would say. And Anderson just takes the point further, right? In case it was lost on us, that he implicates Helen White in this. Helen White's mom is implicated later in this, and this Schnitzel, a college professor, is also sort of indicted, right? That everybody's doing the amour propre thing. Everybody's wondering, how does this look for me? How can I use this to leverage this to get what I want? And everybody's playing this sort of status game, and George is breaking free of it, and Helen is obviously having a similar experience to George, and also wants to break free of it. But Anderson does a good job of showing how this is the swamp out of which we must emerge. And for our 10th graders, my God, from North Dallas, talk about the swamp is everywhere, right? This status swamp, and it would be helpful to help them think that through. I think it's great that Anderson, really presses this issue of loneliness and isolation involved in this insight, both for reasons, at least from my perspective, that are probably good and bad, or accurate and inaccurate. Just sort of the why loneliness and isolation. Well, again, the responsibility for meaning in his life is falling on his shoulders, his own shoulders, I think, for the first time ever. And that, I think, is the basis of the loneliness and isolation. I think it's neat that he doesn't hear a voice when he's waiting for that voice to tell him what to do earlier. I think it's a mistaken romantic idea that the culture has, right? That you can just find yourself and find your passion, and your meaning will just sort of spring, fully formed out of Zeus's head, for you. And so he's going to eventually need to, like 99% of us, grow into our meaning, and we grow into our passion by our relationships with other people. And so it's not as if sophistication is essentially an isolated phenomenon or an inward phenomenon. It just is for George at this time, because he hasn't let his world take a big role in helping him determine this meaning. And again, Hamlet makes the same mistake. Lots of characters in literature make the same mistake, right? As if meaning were an internal phenomenon, as if somehow if you just shine this flashlight around in the darkness of your own soul, you're going to just stumble upon meaning. It's just going to appear in the flashlight beam, as opposed to it being built over time by your interactions with the world. And again, it's part of the problem for George, is that he doesn't seem to have many male friends with whom he can share this insight, and who are all sort of building this web of meaning together, And so it's great for the boys if they can pull that off. Again, the stories of those 36 hours over a weekend to finish the newspaper with your best friends, and coming into talents and skills you didn't know you had, and forming those bonds all at the same time. It's just, again, there's so many great opportunities at St. Mark's. This does not have to be a lonely phenomenon. Again, I think it's fairly helpful for the boys to start thinking of themselves as animals, as human animals, and as potentially divine human spirits. Like, I actually think it's a helpful contrast. And again, they've got the lizard brain and the liminal covering, and then they've got the cortex. And this divides itself actually quite well. And a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old boy is right in that situation where the cortex is beginning to be capable of carrying the day in the face of the other parts of the brain. And different kinds of meaning are really becoming possible for that boy. And so here George is in the process of learning how to face the fact that he's a frisky animal, and to realize that unless he gets that under control, he's not going to be able to live the adult life that he's capable of living, and achieving the meaning that is available to it. Another wonderful passage, this idea of ghosts of the living, and again, the sort of paradoxical juxtaposition of life in the absence of life. Come from nothing, live, and then go back to nothing. Well, here these people weren't there in the yesterday night, and then they were there during the day, and ruckus, 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 noise, 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 laughing, shouting, chasing, performing, meaning, and then it's gone. And to be in that space again of the mortality of meaning, it's this paradox that George is learning to get on the right side of, right? He starts developing a love, now it's gone. That meaning's gone, and how wonderful that meaning's there, because again, you can just judge it as being inferior or something. But he's really on the brink of a kind of macro empathy for all meaning and all human activity, and all the ways humans can generate any sort of meaning by being there in its immediate absence after it was there. And it's like, that meaning is great. What an achievement that meaning is, I think is in the air. And again, it doesn't need to be there. It's achieved. It's achieved through again, competence and relatedness. And in particular, right, that the fair is about people bringing the cows that they raised, and the crops that they raised, and the pies that they baked, and the skills that they have to show off. And so it's a showcase of competence, and it's done with all of your townsfolk. And so it's a huge celebration of relatedness as well. And again, he's just sort of subconsciously sinking all this in, and Anderson does such a good, concise job on it. Here, he really cashes it out, right? That the the wisdom and courage that comes from granting that life doesn't have any cosmic significance. It's not there, and then it's there, and then it's gone. But that in that being there, it is meaningful, and to face the fullness of that, and to again, you can use that as something to cry about and commit suicide about, or you can use it as a springboard toward, you know what, I'm going to make sure there's a lot of meaning there in that interval. And so, you know, the fact that we're all in this together, and we can work together toward thriving and having meaning. We can build meaning together. You know, it brings tears to his eyes. It brings tears to Whitman's eyes. It brings tears, I think, to a sophisticated person's eyes. Like, what a huge blessing. And so again, plot wise, he finds Helen, and she's calling for him, and he's calling for her, and it's a little cheesy, but you know, whatever. He develops reverence for her and for the town, and following up on what we were just talking about in context, I think that reverence is a reverence for the ability to create meaning. That as a group of people, we can create meaning. It doesn't have to be there, but it can be there. And we can make it, and people do make it. How extraordinary that we make meaning. There's not much of the universe. It's a big place, and the only place where meaning happens that we know of is right here in modern life on Earth. And so, what an amazing thing! And he starts to have reverence for that ability. And again, they're still in this great dichotomy between, you know, animals and neo-divine people, right? Where they constantly, a couple times, two or three times, they sort of fall back into this notion, wow, we should be having, you know, making out right now or having sex right now. And then they're like, very quickly they realize that's not what this is about. And so this isn't a summer, you know, romance sex romp. This is people really becoming sophisticated people and recognizing aspects of themselves that transcend animals, and what their goals are. And the goal is, you know, like is meaning. And there they are in the quiet, right? And though they got together to sort of talk, they're not talking very much. So there's this intense feeling, and there's this wonderful, almost like they're the eye of the hurricane, right? And there's these references to, you know, near them, the townspeople are going crazy, right? The opera house, there's a performance going on of probably hyper drama, as operas tend to be, and then there's all this dancing going on, and then there's these fires and all of this great crazy dancing sparks, and coming to terms with sort of the crazy huge energies of modern life, and keeping an appropriate awareness of them and loving them but not getting sucked into them seems to all be part of the process of sophistication, right? How do you deal with the modern world? How do you turn your back on it? Do you get sucked into it, or is there this sort of middle space? And that seems to me, at least, what these passages are about. You know, we come to the great last line, and it all comes together. You know, I think that thing that makes, you know, the mature life of men and women in the modern world possible is sophistication. I don't know why else he would call the story that. And I think it's neat that they have for a moment, right, that this can be lost fairly easily, and we don't know how it's going to play out, it's going to need to be reinforced, right? And again, that's part of the head, heart, hands thing. See it with your head, return to it with your head, start adjusting your virtuous responses to it, and start caring based on it. And now you're going to do your best to make sure it's not just a momentary phenomenon, and that you're going to actually have this as part of your being going forward. And we get a sense of how important Sherwood Anderson thinks this is. Like, it's the precondition for mature life in the modern world, that you're sophisticated. So let's just circle back, and at least one way of understanding what sophistication is, it's kind of wisdom that's applied to a life skillfully to help aid thriving. I would say that's what it is. Well, then what's the insight? And again, I think the main insight is that we're going to die. And that meaning is also mortal. That humans are mortal, that meaning is mortal, and that all the different ways that animals don't have access to attaining meaning, and all the different ways that humans have invented to lose the thread and devolve into amusement, and sort of, again, this dominant idea that you work to get money to spend on recreation, and that work, which is negative, and then play, which is fun, and all the maturity that this story is trying to get at is lost in that kind of dichotomy. And so that seems to me what the takeaway is, right? That all the pulls on the ambition and the amusement and the amour propre, right? Those are the swamps. Those are the swamps that are trying to suck us in, and we have this ability to navigate those. And it starts with this insight and epiphany, but it needs to be reinforced. And that, to me, at least, is the ultimate takeaway from the story. When I've taught this before, as part of the bigger collection of stories, kids have often asked, most of these stories seem to be about grotesques. Is sophistication itself a grotesque? And I suppose the answer is, I guess it could be, but it seems to escape that in the sense that it does seem to be aware. A sophisticated understanding does seem to be aware of the multiplicity of countervalences in the world, right? We're part animal, we're part human. Meaning is really important, but it's also transient, and on and on and on, right? Like the life of the village is sort of superficial, and the fair is kind of stupid, and it's also beautiful and powerful, and so I think the sophisticated person is one who has negative capability and is capable of holding these paradoxes in his or her mind and allowing them their power without forcing one to be right. So now to think about the key issues in relation to what we've learned about George. Does he have competence? Again, compared to most St. Mark's seniors, I would say probably no. He just doesn't have the kind of opportunities our boys have had. And, is he good at writing news stories? Maybe. We don't really know. Does he have many friends, relatedness? Well, he knows a lot of people in the town. He's got a lot of, a lot of people talk to him, and that's great. But does he have strong friendships? I don't know. I don't think so. So is he that competent yet? No, I don't think so. And so he's not incompetent. He's not doesn't have bad relationships with people, but I would say he's not as strong as, say, our average graduating senior. So, but autonomy seems, well ahead of the game. That this way of approaching life and it's going to guarantee that what he does with his life is going to be largely chosen by him, and so he's going to be strong in that. And the other ones could get developed as he goes forward in his life. Again, he hasn't had all these coaches and opportunities to lead and all the things that you get at St. Mark's, and so who knows? We've got high hopes for George Willard. George's virtues. Again, he hasn't yet made the move, I think, from to service. He's hyper engaged in his community, so he's got that first step down. Like, he will listen to anybody. He will. He's curious about everything. Is he benevolent? I mean, again, he's not against anyone, but is he actually for people to solve their problems? I don't see it. He's incredibly empathetic, but does he take on other people's feelings and life outcomes as his own and help them solve their problems? Again, not only in the story but in the rest of the book, I don't think so. Not very well. And so, is he wise? I think he's very wise. I think this is deep wisdom for him is shown in this story. Is he generous? Kind of maybe emotionally, but again, when it comes to actually doing things for other people, I don't see it. Again, he seems pretty self-absorbed, and you could say, oh, that's natural for an 18-year-old boy. I hope, it might be natural, but I certainly know of dozens and dozens of cases at St. Mark's where the powers that be and have gotten boys well beyond that, and so he seems modest in his approach to other people, and again, he's got those flares of ambition and everything. But in general, I think he's modest. He's very imaginative. I think he's very courageous to face what he faces in this night, and existential courage. He seems very resilient in dealing with his mom's loss and all the different things he has to deal with. And he's resolute. I think he's resolute in that he's going to have meaning in his life. And he's firmly on that path. I have no idea if he's detail oriented or not. I don't know if he's constant. My sense is this issues with Helen flare up and die out, and is he devoted to being a newspaperman? I don't know. He's a little young to be constant anyway. And again, he just hasn't made that move toward others yet. He's a great listener, right? He's all about learning about life from others. He's not really, at least to my eye in the book, he's not trying to serve others, though. He's not a leader in the fullest sense of that term yet at all. And so anyway, that's my take on it. And finishing off this way, the goal is to give boys the entrees into categories of trying to understand themselves and the ethical world. And in so many ways, we know they need repetition in order to learn. And when it's come to ethics, again, that historically in the last 50 years, it's been thrown out the window, and you just sort of hope it all hangs together. So this is an opportunity. We're trying through this method to through repetition, which is the way they learn, right? Just to not play this game like they don't learn this way, but that they do learn this way. So we're going to repeat this analysis in a number of books, right? We hope over years, right? In order to try to give them some conceptual entree into this analysis that they can actually use when they're analyzing life, and they don't have a book sitting around. They did just happen not to have, they haven't written a 3-page paper on it recently or something, right? We want this actually to stick, so that's why we're doing this. I know it's in some ways it's odd or even silly, but anyway, here we go. Like, what are his skills? He's like off the charts on engagement, seems to me. Again, serving, he's not a bad server. He's not trying to undermine anybody. But as far as I can tell, he's not really out for anybody else's good yet in any sort of rigorous way. Again, if he hasn't served, he certainly can't coordinate. So we don't know. One would hope he learns all these skills as he goes forward. He doesn't have them yet. And problem solving, he's just sort of all in his head. So, he's a great listener. He he's very smart, and he defines things well, and thinks things through well, and imagines outcomes. And but again, since he's not trying to solve anybody's problem except his own, he it's not clear what's going on with these either. But anyway, I think looking at that page and seeing where the blue is and where the white is and the absence of red says a lot about George, actually. In this vein, the head, heart, hands, we're trying to get the boys to think in terms of, George seems, way ahead of the game in his understanding. He's wise. He understands things very well. He certainly has very responsive feelings, though he's got some virtue gaps ultimately when it comes time to actually do. And again, the skills of caring, we just don't know. It's just not clear he's tried that hard to actually solve problems. So he's got a lot of work to do there. And, we don't know how that's going to turn out. Finally, the different aspects of his selfhood that we could focus on. He's got a wide web of social roles. It doesn't seem very deep, right? He seems to have an absence of friends by any normal standard of friends for an 18-year-old. So we leave that one in white. He is coming to terms with a telos, right? He's got an idea about a career that he might have. He's got very exalted, ahead of the curve thoughts about meaning generation, and so he seems to have a healthy I'm going to grow into the fullness of my being by doing my best to guess what the next best thing for me to do is, attitude, and I think that will serve him well. But he's only 18, so anyway, his character, again, it's like his effectiveness to help other people. We don't know. I mean, he just isn't trying yet. He's still in sort of the absorb knowledge of the world stage. He has a great stories to tell. Obviously, this book is a bunch of stories about all this people in the town. So he has a series of great narratives to tell about other people, and he's heard a lot of great stories, and he probably can write a great story. He hasn't lived the content of a great narrative yet, and it's not clear if you told the story of Winesburg, Ohio, that you would need to tell the story of George Willard. So when you flip that around, is he part of the bigger story yet? Not really, but he's only 18. But anyway, he's well on his way to knowing how to craft one. Strong personality, a strong ability to perform himself, it seems to me. And he's got strong voice and hyper inward, right? A triple plus and inwardness for George, no question. And here are just a handful of questions to ask the boys at the end. Is just possibly to try to get them in this place, to share it with George, and one would hope to start thinking about their own lives with this backward glance, and to start asking themselves, when I'm 90 and looking back at my life, what should have been there? What's likely to be there? If I just hit fast forward on my current virtue set, where would that take me? And then versus looking back with this sort of open expanse where it hasn't happened yet, where would I want it to take me, right? If I bring all of my wisdom to bear and all the story's wisdom to bear, where would I want to be? And then to ask them to go back into their own skin and say, well, what do I need to do better? How do I need to change so that I develop as I could develop into manhood, and not just as I happen to develop into manhood? And finally, it seems to me the hope would be that this would be a great eventual springboard to the Family History Project, because you're going to be asking them to look backward and to ask them to go forward even further in their lives and look backward. to really develop that sense of, where does meaning come from, and how do things go right and how do things go wrong, and how do people thrive and how do they fail to thrive, and what are the ways things go wrong, and also then to add that component of designing your life, where then what do I do specifically? Like, what can I do this year to amplify my competence and my relatedness and my autonomy, so that I can be an ethos builder and an engager and a server and a coordinator, and get more and more enmeshed with this life in skillful ways, so that there's meaning and abundance for them and for everybody around them. And again, that's the hope. So good luck.